First witness is Silkie Carlo, who's director of Big Brother Watch and a senior advocacy officer for Liberty. How is Facebook, knowing that I like, I don't know, white wine or E-type Jaguars, part of some sort of Orwellian nightmare then?
Facebook collects data that you provide it, but it also collects data about you. And that's not only from the platform, but it's across the whole internet and offline as well. And that can be all kinds of personal data. In fact, every click that you make online somewhere is highly likely to be tracked. And so a package of information can be put together about you that then can be used, whether that's to market products to you or, as we've seen recently, to potentially sell to the highest bidder and then be used in political campaigns. And that really risks undermining democracy.
Michael Joe?
Is the collection of the data by Facebook and others in itself immoral?
I think it is. Yes, I think it was a very bad plan from the start. I think the structure of Facebook lends itself to... It's essentially a global surveillance machine. It's a giant intelligence database.
Why do you call it immoral, though?
Because I think the risks in that kind of centralised global data collection that clearly circumvents any sensible notion of informed consent is immoral. You know, great risks have been taken, and we will now, I think, witness the price to democratic processes.
People have consented to it, haven't they? They've got a lot out of it. I don't see any great evidence that people in general are highly exercised about it.
I think people are, and that's why it's been, top of the news agenda for the last 2 weeks.
Well, that's because journalists are exercised about it.
The way that consent is constructed on these platforms is for the protection of the platform, not for the individual. And so, the individual doesn't actually know how much information is being collected about them. So we're seeing people going online saying, I've just downloaded all of my Facebook data. I couldn't believe there were all of my call logs, my text messages, everyone I've ever known, one-night stands from 5 years ago. I can't believe all this information is there about me. People are shocked.
They put it there.
It's been collected and centralised from lots of different places. And so, we need to have a conversation now about how this doesn't happen again, and make sure that consent is meaningful and that it's informed. And that's actually required by the law as well.
Do you see any benefits to society, potentially? Medical records, genetic information, this sort of thing that can help with scientific and medical breakthroughs?
There are enormous, there's an enormous potential for benefits in the use of big data in the right way, with consent. And it's all about how we create ethical models of doing that, particularly in science. But with personal data, I am suspicious. I think the risks are so great, and the risks of a platform like Facebook are so great, that we will see, if we continue this model, then we will see surveillance used against populations.
Isn't some of the evidence that we see from the public rather pointing the other direction? I mean, whenever there's a terrorist outrage and someone's brought to court, the first thing that people say is, why weren't proper tabs kept on this person? It's as though there's a great public appetite that we should know more about people.
Well, tabs are kept on people. We have, in the UK, the most authoritarian surveillance regime of any democracy in history. The question is not...
Do you expect anyone to believe that hyperbole?
It's true. And that's why we're litigating. That's why we're taking the government to court. And already the Investigatory Powers Act that was passed last year has been found that a large chapter of it is unlawful because the government collects billions of pieces of data every single day. And that's a big part of this story that has been missed. SCL, the group that owns Cambridge Analytica, has a number of contracts with the government and is involved in propaganda exercises in different countries around the world.
Now, Charles Fraser.
I can't get worked up in the same way that you are about this. So let's just try and do this philosophically. In what sense do you own the information that's out there in the world about you?
Well, information about you speaks to your privacy, and that's a fundamental right.
No, but some bits of information about you. So I'm sitting here, I haven't met you before, you have brown hair. Okay, so I've just told 1 million people listening that you have brown hair. Is that a piece of information about you, of which you should have a right to privacy over?
This is really quite different and taking things out of perspective to what we're talking about, which is psychological traits being assessed by people from the totality of their everyday behaviours.
I'm asking you whether you own the information that's out there in the world about you.
You have a right to information about you. That's what the data protection framework is.
I don't understand what you just said. You have a right. So in terms of what I've just said about characteristic that I've just seen, that you have brown hair, do you have a right for me how I use that information?
Yeah, well, if you were to use that information in a particularly controversial way, but it's an unrealistic example. It's an entirely unrealistic example, Jazz. And what we're talking about here is really quite serious and really quite different.
You see, I don't think it's serious. And I'm not even sure it's different, because I'm just talking about there is information about you swilling around all over the world. People talk about you, people say all things, some online, some not. In what sense do you own it? And what sense can you control it?
So you don't think it's serious that Facebook can gauge your political interests, your greatest hopes, your deepest fears, your family, who your children are, facial recognition, voice recognition, potentially, your sexuality, can evaluate things about you that you might not even know about yourself. I think that's very serious, and I think we can't be complacent just because we have a relatively stable political situation in the UK. In other countries around the world, this kind of information can be weaponised.
Do you think Jeremy Corbyn had a right for his views on Facebook about an anti-Semitic mural to stay private?
I'm not to be drawn on that. He made a public comment, and so that was a public comment. That's again.
No, but it was so he did a private. He was having a private conversation on Facebook about a mural, and that has sparked an important debate. And you'd actually say that was a rather important thing that they, found that out about.
I don't know the particulars of that case.
You haven't been looking at the news about anti-Semitism in the
my
last few years.
understanding was that it was a public comment, and actually what we're seeing is that everything on Facebook is essentially public, and the issue is, what are global corporations for profit doing with this enormous amount of data? What are governments doing with this enormous amount of data? Because democracies are at risk and people's rights are at risk.
In the age of the selfie, haven't the boundaries of what's private and what's not private changed? People are willingly putting their food, their bodies, all sorts of things out there, their relationships on there. People aren't quite so bothered by this sort of stuff anymore.
I think that's a really good point, and privacy norms have shifted absolutely in the internet age, and what we're witnessing this week is the tension around that. On the one hand, people want to share, they want to connect, but they don't want to be commodified, they don't want to be surveilled, they don't want to be manipulated and propagandised.
Silkie Carlo, thank you very much indeed.